Ready for a start. How good's this, Scotty? Nice and easy. Hey.
Well, I was going to mention your commentary ability. A lot of events commentated, Olympic Games.
3. There we go.
Well, welcome everybody. Do you want to kick off Sandy? Sandy is our ride director, and he's going to give us a state of play. So take it away, Sandy, as we do a 5-minute warm-up.
Thanks, Duncan. And let's race director and feel like in the air traffic reporter, with not only the way I look, but with the congestion we've actually got in the group today. So we've got a massive turn up again. And we just want to say thank you very much for the support you provided. Telstra Connected Cycling, it started off as an idea just to help us through COVID, and the feedback we've got has been fantastic. Particular call out to some people. David Coleman from Telstra office is styling in from London and joining us, so welcome David for the first time. We also have regulars from the US and Petros Lucas, Dave Snap, Nick Holdsworth from New Zealand. So Petros and Dave Snap are in the US. Also a big call out to, we've now had over 30 people regularly join us on more than 4 rides. So again, thank you for your support and spreading the word and bringing your friends along. We hope you continue to do that. And for those of you who are new, again, welcome. We've got terrific turnouts from all of the capital cities as well. Big contingent in Brisbane, a home and tour down under in Adelaide, and of course Melbourne and Sydney as well. We also need to have a call out to those who aren't on Zwift and have no idea what it is that we're doing. Hearing the background noise of the trainer. We do have on the screen, if you swipe through, you will be able to see the game, and basically all the avatars, all the riders you see on the screen are just the avatars that represent all of the riders. So for those of you who are able to watch the game as well, you can flip through the screens and actually have a look and see. Finally, for anyone new to the meetup, it is ride or as hard, as easy as you like. We will stay together. There is some smarts in the game to do that. So again, thanks very much for all of your support and all the wonderful feedback. And Kurt will have a bit more about feedback later at the end of the ride. But that's where we're actually up to. This is Telstra Connected Cycling. People bringing purpose to technology. A great way to start the day. So back to you, Duncan, and let's get into the discussion with Scott.
Yeah, go on, mate. Well, our guest today is great Aussie cyclist Scott McGrory. Scott has delivered an incredible cycling career for himself and his family and the country, being on the pedals for Australia for over 17 years. So Scotty's success, Olympic success, is quite extraordinary as well, with the bronze medal in the 1988 Olympic Games in Seoul as an 18-year-old, and then winning gold for Australia 12 years later in front of the home crowd at the Velodrome in Sydney at the 2000 Games. What a moment. So to speak about all his life in cycling and a few lessons he's learned along the way, welcome to Telstra Connected Cycling. And not riding this morning, but looking resplendent in his beard, Olympic champ Scott McGrory. G'day, mate.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm still not convinced about the beard. It's just one of those things that I guess as a male, you want to do once in your life, and this may be once too often. I'm just not sure. We'll wait and see how it goes when I come out of isolation and start seeing humans again.
Well, with the number of pedals you've done into the bike, every one of those grey hairs has been earned.
Yeah, I do like the grey. I wouldn't mind a little bit more, actually. I feel a bit more distinguished with the grey.
Anyway, enough about your facial hair. So where did it all begin for you? How did you fall in love with the bike? Who introduced you to the bike? Because you're a Southeast Queenslander. So who was that person who sort of like gave you your first bike or took you to your first race?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? With cycling, a question popped up on Facebook from an old friend a little while ago, just about who's the greatest sports person, in their opinion, and greatest athlete. And I chose not to choose a cyclist because I felt that to get into cycling, firstly, often takes opportunity, because you have a lot of countries, African nations, and continents basically, that don't seem to have the opportunity in certain sports. Swimming might be another one, like yourself, Duncan, that it takes some sort of opportunity for those athletes to get involved in it. Now, for me, my family were never into cycling. It was simply a cousin, a sort of extended part of my extended family that was into bikes, and he came down to. We were living in Wodonga at the time, and he came down to Wodonga to do a track race, and we went out to just watch him and support him. We'd never seen cycling before, and
Can everyone just go on, sorry, Scotty, can everyone just go on mute? We're just hearing someone with COVID cough his lungs up. So if everyone can go on mute, that would be awesome, and we'll send an ambulance if you need it.
Yeah, I'm sure, okay.
So a cousin gave you the bike?
Cousin, we just went and watched him race, and that was the first time. So my older brother and I, 6 kids in my family. I'm the youngest, and my older brother, who's only 2 years older than me, thought this looks interesting. So I just, as a little brother, followed him, and we got into cycling. Went down to the local club in Wodonga. We eventually moved only a year later up to the Gold Coast, where I did really grow up my formative years, especially as a cyclist. And they had bikes available for kids to use, just to loan, to see if they liked cycling or not, and I did enough and stuck at it. I had some success very early on, so I was 9 when all of this happened. And by the end of that first summer on a borrowed bike, my dad was convinced that I liked the sport enough for him to invest. So he invested a whole $50 in a frame, put that together with some old second-hand parts. The first race I had on that bike as a 9-year-old was the Schoolboys Championship, and I won it. And first prize was a brand new shiny bike. So at the age of 9, I had two track bikes to race with.
Almost professional as a 9-year-old. That's amazing. Hey, yeah. And you had a really formative win too when you were about 14 at Currumbin. There was a crit at Currumbin, and you took on some, adult company, and you won it. So, did winning come easy early on?
It did, and I don't want to say this with any ego. Growing up, as I said, my formative years on the Gold Coast, and the race you mentioned was a criterium race, just a little club race. I would have been 14, maybe almost turning 15. There was several riders that were going to the Los Angeles Olympic Games, and in the road program, and I turned up to do. They had a 2-lap time trial, which would have been about 2.2 kilometres or so for the 2 laps, and then a criterium street race straight after that. And the time trial, if you weren't already an established rider, also doubled up as a sitting process. If someone new came along and rode well, then they would be put in A grade or B grade, whatever it would be. And I won the time trial as a kid up against some of the riders from the Olympic team. Now, I didn't know what that really meant. Everybody rushed over to me and patted me on the back and congratulated me. So I realised quickly that it was fairly significant. The only person that didn't congratulate me was the member of the Olympic team that I had just beaten as a child. So he was a little bit embarrassed. And then we got into the race afterwards, the actual street race afterwards. I finished 3rd, but I still remember being naive at the time, but with the benefit of hindsight, that the Olympic team actually, or some of the members of the Olympic team got together and rode against me to make sure I didn't win in the criterium. So I only ended up finishing 3rd as a 14, turning 15-year-old up against the Olympic team. So it did come pretty easily to me. It took a very long time for me to really understand, I guess, how to be consistently successful and what it's supposed to take, and how difficult it is to be the best in the world or up amongst the best in the world, because in those early days, I could win pretty comfortably. And I didn't need a lot of tactics. I could just use brute power and speed. So yeah, it took some maturity for me to really understand what it means to be elite and how difficult it should be and normally is.
Well, one of those life lessons of becoming an accomplished rider, and not so much such a brute talent, if you want to put it that way. Were you feeling that in 1988 when you were placed on that Australian team to go over to Seoul for the 1988 Olympics?
I had no idea what I was doing in 1988. So I was 18 at the Olympics, and I came into the Institute of Sport 1 year before at 17. I feel that I was maybe mature as an athlete in terms of my physical ability, obviously to make the national team at 17 the year before. But Mentally, I didn't really understand the process. It all came fairly simple. You know, winning things in Queensland, state championships, go to national championships as a junior, win those, get selected to go to the Junior World Championships, Squash Institute of Sport, and I went into the elite senior team as a second-year junior, so as an under-19 rider. The next year just happened to be the Olympic year, and I was one of the up-and-coming young guys, and it seemed pretty easy, straight into the Olympic team and off to the Games, come away with a bronze medal. Wow, this is pretty simple. What it did plant was my thoughts that I could possibly be an Olympic gold medalist. So if I could be bronze at 18, surely I have the ability to then go on to win gold. I just didn't at that stage understand the process of what that I really needed to, the fundamentals to the process that I needed to establish and recognise, so that I could actually have that opportunity to be the best in the world, as I said before. What was really bizarre about, in hindsight, in 1988, as you remember, Duncan, you know, you were a big star, certainly, of those games, was that we were still up against the Soviet Union and the East Germans, and there was always a lot of talk about the regime and the programs and the medical programs that those nations were on. And our national coach basically told us, you know, without saying it directly, he was saying, you know, in the 6 to 8 months leading up to the Games, he made it fairly clear that he felt that those teams, those nations were using medicine, and we had a chance to win bronze and be the best of the rest, because we wouldn't beat the Soviets and we wouldn't beat the East Germans because they took drugs and we didn't. That's kind of the message that we got from our national coach. And of course, we won the bronze medal in the team pursuit, which for us was like the goal. We felt as if that was the goal that we were chasing, and we came away with it. It wasn't for a number of years that I look back now at that time and think, wow, wouldn't it be better? Like, mentally for me, I would be more comfortable within myself had we trained every day, being asked by the coach to just be the best we could be, to try and do the best we could do, rather than just be the best of the rest because you're going to get beaten. And we probably may have still come away third, but I just had a little bit more peace of mind that at least we went there with the right mindset to do the best we could, and do us our personal best, or be the fastest we've ever been, without just thinking that, you know, every training session, maybe 0.5% was held back because we knew we were going to lose anyway. So it may not have made any difference, but it's something for me in my mind that I would have liked, that peace of mind to know that we went there and really put in 100% all the way through, regardless of what the result was. And hey, we may have ended up finishing second. I don't think we would have won, but we would have gone better than bronze.
Yeah, no, it's interesting where the mindset training is now, the trajectory of growth that we've all come on. You know, like, we talk about mindset all the time. We talk about it in corporate life, with our family life, and especially in sport. And we really didn't talk about it back then. We sort of had this directive coaching from people like Charlie Walsh or Laurie Lawrence, and they sort of gave us the box to think in a little bit. And the drugs in sport during those, you know, Soviet bloc regimes, it was 30 or 40 years of embedded behaviour by them on us to make us think that way. So that's the way I look at it, and thank goodness it's different from today. So from 1988, you really opened up and you started to, what, did you look at Europe, the European road racing at that stage? Did you look at sort of like where we can go, what we can do? You know, the European racing was just so tantalising, with so much going on, and the first American with Greg LeMond winning, and sort of setting up, you know, sort of like all other nations, like Phil Anderson was winning, and all this sort of stuff in Europe. You know, did you have your eyes completely on Europe, because there was a massive track season, massive track industry over there? Did you look immediately like that, or was that time coming because you were with Charlie Walsh Institute of Sport and things like that?
Yeah. Well, so the last line there was spot on. It's not. We look at the way things are now with the young cyclists coming through, and there are several sports like ours where there's been a great pathway that's been developed, and Europe isn't as far away as it was back then in the mindsets of the athletes. Obviously, geographically, it hasn't changed, but during the program in the late 80s in cycling, we were really fundamentally focused on track cycling. It was the Olympic Games. And this was before the professionals and the amateurs came together. So we were racing as amateurs for the Olympics. The professionals were predominantly focusing on the Tour de France, Tour of Italy, Tour of Spain, those big events. And there was a big disconnect in our mindset from what we were doing as amateur track cyclists chasing medals compared to the riders that were doing the Tour de France. And to get the jump across seemed enormous. There'd only been a couple of riders. Phil Anderson, who was an absolute pioneer of Australian cycling. He was by far the biggest name we had in Europe, but there was only another 2 or 3 riders from Australia in the professional peloton. So it didn't seem like an obvious thing to do, go from the Olympic Games in Seoul in '88 and then just go into a road team and start racing on the road and having a road career. So there was a real disconnect, which was a big disadvantage because I did leave the Institute of Sport only a couple of years after the '88 Olympics. I say leave. I was asked to leave. My performances.
We'll get to that. We'll get to Charlie in a minute, mate.
We'll get to that.
You got to Europe in what, about '92 at the Jayco team having a look for the first time, or 80,
later,
like '93?
Yeah, we
'94.
We had a stint in '94. We went to America. So it's just as an Australian team. So for those of you that know Jayco, it's Jayco Caravans. Jerry Ryan is the owner, founder of Jayco Australia. And he sponsored our little cycling team. It was the first properly professional cycling team in Australia where everyone was being paid. There'd been professionals before, but they weren't a part of a team where all of the riders, there were only 5 of us, were actually being paid as professionals to do nothing other than ride. And we went to America. We had 2 seasons, 94, 95. And I enjoyed it. We had a lot of fun. It was fantastic. I won races there, but I knew I wanted more. It was really just a taste. It was nice, and I could have had a lovely career over there, but I just wanted more. And I knew that Europe is where it was at. You know, as a kid, I used to get videos sent from Europe about the big races, Paris-Roubaix, and some of the big track events that I eventually went to do, the 6-day events on the velodrome over there. And I just watched those videos over and over and over and over and just dream of going to Europe. I just didn't know how to get there. And it wasn't really until after that stint in America that I thought, okay, I'm going to have to make the effort. And I found a way to get myself to Europe. And from 1996, lived there for a decade and became a proper professional. When you think even that, 1996, there's still the Olympics that year that I didn't go to, the Olympics 4 years before that I didn't go to. And that's still 8 years on from the Olympics in '88 that I did go to. So there was a long period there where I was in the wilderness and I just didn't know where I was going as an athlete. I just liked the sport enough to stay in it, and eventually found myself in Europe in the mid to late 90s.
It's funny you should say that, Scotty, because when I look at your record of all the winning that you were doing in 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, and then you come back into the Olympic fold, it looks like you were doing a lot of winning and all of it in Europe.
Yeah, well, look, there's certainly a lot of wins. I guess maybe that's one of the things that just kept me going, was that I was being successful. Maybe I'm a slow learner. It took me a long time to really understand, what it takes to be a consistently successful cyclist. But, I loved the sport. There was no question. I was competitive as a kid. When I got into cycling, I did enjoy it. One thing that probably kept me within it, even through bad times when I was struggling, was the sense of adventure. So when I was a child and I'd go for a ride, the longer the ride, the go over this next hill into the next valley, that was a real adventure. And, I often thought about even the swimmers, Duncan, with the training that the swimmers, which would be brutal, the amount of laps of a pool you'd have to do, but it was a pool, the only pool, and staring at a black line up and down. And I, as a young athlete growing up, I could go into the next valley, choose another road, another climb, another descent to focus on.
I've said on this call many times it takes a special kind of intelligence to be a swimmer, mate, and you're confirming it. So thank you very much. That's great.
I was trying to. You're failing.
You're failing. When I look at you coming back into the Olympic fold for 2000, like every athlete in Australia, if you had any chance to go to the Sydney Olympic Games, your home Olympic Games, you basically grew another leg to get there, and it looks like that as well. But I remember I had great clashes with my head coach Don Talbot back in when Don first took over the reins in the early 90s. He and I just didn't get to see eye to eye, and that's because he's short and he's an ugly man. But anyway, when I look at your career and I read a little bit between the lines, and I remember going on Roy and HG one time, a radio show, and they said, "What do you think of Don Talbot? You know, is he an idiot?" You know, and I was just like, "It is a radio show," and I'm like, "No, he's fine." He goes, "Well, just beat the desk twice for yes and once for no." So of course I beat the desk once for no, and they followed up with another one for yes. So anyway, So what's your feeling with Charlie Walsh? Like, Charlie Walsh is like this evil little dictator at times, and not everybody's going to get on with him. Was that the case with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm beating the table twice. Yeah, he was obviously a very successful coach, and the head of the program for a long time. So all of the best athletes in Australia were coming into his program, and therefore you would get success because you had the best riders to work with. We did a lot of experimenting in training, things that you look back on now that you'd laugh about. But at the time, that was, it was just trying to test the body to see what we could or couldn't do. So I had no issues with any of that. The challenges I had with Charlie was me as an athlete, I needed to be worked with. You don't basically just tell me to do something. And if I ask the question why, tell me it's because, I told you so. And it was training on fear. You did it because if you didn't, then you would be kicked out of the team. The team is a team, and it's for all of us, and each individual needs to get out of it the best they can so they can be the best they can be. And for some of those riders, it worked. Blanket training system, everyone doing the same thing, no one answering back, doing it because you're being told to do it, and they had success and became world champions and Olympic medalists. But for me, I preferred to understand why we were doing things and why we should or shouldn't. I didn't need to debate it. I just wanted to know a little bit more about it. And that's something that happens now. The coaching staff now work with the athletes. They don't set themselves above the athletes. They work with them, and the athletes, even if it's only perceived, think that the coaches are there for them to give them the best chance they have to win. But in the days of Charlie, you really understood that the program was about Charlie, and the success that we had as riders was really just bolstering his career and his stature within Australian and global cycling, which I bucked against. Now, unfortunately, that's why there is 12 years between my Olympic births, because I didn't get a go for 92. I didn't even try out for 96 because I knew he wouldn't select me. Luckily for me, 2000 had an event coming in for the first time that I was the only expert at within the Australian program. So that's why I came back in, and it was Charlie Walsh that asked me to come back in to ride the Sydney Olympics in the Madison event, because I was the most accomplished in that particular discipline. If I think back to my early days, had I been a bit more mature, I could have worked with that program still. And got it for. I rebelled against it, thinking that I was making a stand, but in the end, I just got replaced. They got another athlete, and the program moved on without me. So it was to my own detriment that I was unable to work within that program. And as I say, be mature or intelligent enough to just work the system for my own benefit, but not as an individual, just so that we would still do well as a team, but at least I could still be a part of it.
Be a little bit less sensitive to be able to set up a little bit more of a better future for you. So take us to Sydney, mate. Like you said, you're back in the fold.
12 years between games. What's that?
Yeah, 12 years between games, and you're doing an event that you are one of the best in the world at, if not the best in the world, in front of the home crowd. So take us to that day, mate.
Wow. Okay. Mixed emotions for me, because anyone that knows my story, and Sandy certainly does, and he was at one of the cycling events a couple of years ago where I spoke about the Sydney Olympics. We coming into it, my racing partner Brett Aitken and I. It's a two-man team event on the velodrome, the Madison, where one rider's on the track. One rider's in the race each time. The other rider rolls around the top of the velodrome, waiting to come in, and it takes about 30 seconds or 2.5 laps for the peloton to come around and catch up to their teammates. You put your hand out, and your partner grabs you by the hand and slings you into the race. So an ongoing relay race every 2.5 laps or so is when you do the changeovers. So lots going on really exciting race, something you need experience for, because with riders going in and out of the race all over the place, just on a 250-metre velodrome, it's quite hectic. And from the outside, it does look quite scary, and there are often lots of crashes and things that happen with the inexperience and nature. And as the race goes on, it's fatiguing. It was 60 kilometres around a velodrome, so riders were getting very tired towards the end as well. But leading up to that, my partner was having a difficult pregnancy, and she needed to be hospitalised for the last 6 weeks of the pregnancy, and eventually an emergency caesarean, and little Alexander, our son, came along, and everything seemed okay. And 3 days later, they picked up a heart issue, had to be transferred to the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, and required surgery. So that was an ongoing thing. He had several procedures and operations over the next couple of weeks. And he's only a little tacker, so he required more surgery, but they needed him to get a bit bigger after the initial operations that they had. So for the next couple of months, it was a situation of, look, it's not long to the Olympics. What am I going to do? I was thinking about pulling out of the games. And the months before the birth was a challenge, because I was in Europe and coming back and forth to train and race, which was, in terms of preparation for an Olympics, just was not ideal. And the Olympics themselves became less important the more this process went on. And 2.5 months before the games, I was in Europe, and Donna, my partner, had told me that, look, you have to go back to Europe and keep training, otherwise the Olympics will be, completely useless. So she forced me to go back over, because Alexander had stabilised, and things looked okay. He was in ICU still at the Children's. So I went across to Europe, and then I got a phone call about a month later to say, look, he requires another operation. They're a bit worried about it. You better get back. So I got on the plane that day, and got to Singapore, received a phone call. I called Donna when I got to Singapore, knowing the operation would have happened, just to see how things went, with one more flight still to come to get to Melbourne. And she said that they'd nicked a valve in his heart. They put him into cardiac arrest. He's on life support, but they don't expect him to make it through the night. So I had a 3-hour wait, and pretty interesting airports. There's so much security around them, and all I wanted to do was be on my own and really try and contemplate and digest what I'd just been told, thinking I'm about to get on a plane to Melbourne and get back to, the son that had passed away. So I got on the plane, got off in Melbourne, got to the hospital. He hadn't gone. He'd fought through the night, and we had 45 minutes with him before he did pass away. Oh. That was 2.5 months before the Olympics. I gave up. I told her that that's it. There's no point. You get a real dose of reality and what really matters in the world. And you think of 12 years between Olympics. This was the last one I was going to have a go at, but it didn't mean much after losing Al. And after the funeral, she convinced me to go back to Europe. So, look, we better keep trying. It may have been just more of a way of creating a diversion for her and for I. But we went back to Europe, and I kept training and tried to train, and it was a roller coaster. Some days I was training incredibly hard. The next day I could hardly get out of bed, and I was crying, and eventually made it to Sydney. And I do tend to feel that maybe the national coach thought I wasn't in my best condition, but he probably couldn't bring himself to drop the guy from the team that had just had his son pass away. So, I've never spoken about that, but I do have a sneaky suspicion he felt pretty bad about having to make that call if he had to. And the morning of the race, I woke up in the Olympic Village knowing what I believed I hadn't done anywhere near enough training. This was now race day, biggest day of my life in terms of sport. And I felt I hadn't done enough over the last, 8 to 10 months of training. And I felt obliged to apologise to my racing partner, Brett Aiken. He was asleep in his bed in the Olympic Village. So I whispered, "I'm sorry, mate," and then paused to see if he reacted and whether he heard me or not. And I didn't shout it. I wanted to say it, but I didn't really want him to hear it. and he didn't move. So I got out of bed, went and had breakfast. He got up a couple of minutes later. He didn't say anything. And I thought, okay, he didn't hear me, but, you know, I just felt a little bit better that I had at least had attempted to apologise, because I felt that I was going to let him down and I was going to shatter his Olympic dream. And we went through our process, you know, okay, let's go for a ride. Talking tactics, and, you know, I knew all the riders. We went through what we're going to do, the processes, procedures, got to the velodrome later on that day, saw our family and friends. They were full of confidence. They were so happy for us. They knew we were, you know, probably the best team in the world. And I walked into the velodrome after that, into the centre of the track, really second guessing myself. I really had so much self-doubt, and I could see the confidence that everybody else was oozing, and thought, wow, I've had, you know, everybody help me get to this moment in my life. They've really assisted me all the way through, whether it was the national coach himself, friends, family, other team members, and my professional road team that had really worked with me that year as well, on and off. And I'm sitting in the middle of 6,000 people in the velodrome thinking, I can't start this race thinking the way I am. This is ridiculous. You know, I'm about to start the Olympic Games Madison event, and I feel like I'm going to lose. This is nuts. So I thought the only thing that can happen now, there's only one more person that needs to get on board. Everyone else seemed to be on board. Brett was confident. I could tell that. I had to get myself on board. So I picked up my chair. I walked away from the Olympic compound in the middle of the velodrome, sat myself down, and gave myself what I like to refer to as kind of speech that a country football coach would give to his side in a grand final at halftime when they're about 4 or 5 goals down. If it's NRL, they might be, you know, 10 or 12 points down, but he still believes they've got a chance to win. And being a country football coach, he didn't hold back. You know, there were no mics on. There was no one watching, no one videoing, and he just ripped into them. And that's what I did. I just absolutely taught myself a new one to try and understand where I was at. And effectively, it's a really strange thing what you can do mentally. I'd spent months in self-doubt, but I had trained. Maybe is not as well as I would have hoped to have, but I know that I had done some training. So I basically convinced myself that, look, you know what, if you might be at 80%, maybe you're at 90% of your very best, but you can't start the race with the mindset of 50-50. You know, you can't be down at 50% and think you're going to lose. Even if you are underdone, you're going to get out there and give it absolutely everything. Do everything you can. Use all of the experience you've gained over all of those years to put in the best tactical ride that you possibly can to give yourself a chance to win. And hey, wouldn't that be a story? If I could then win, knowing that I was underdone, hadn't trained enough, and all of a sudden, it was like a new challenge popped into my head, picked up my chair, I went back into the compound, sat down, started my warm-up, and I was confident that we would win, and I would be almost laughing at my competitors that I beat them, knowing that I wasn't as fit as them. And it was extraordinary. And at the time, you don't really consciously understand what you're doing. It took me a few years later to think back to that whole process and really marvel at what I was able to do, how I was able to turn myself around. We completely dominated the race. There was a couple of tight moments where Brett had some spokes ripped out of his front wheel. During a change, I had one hand on the handlebar and a rider came over the top of me and hit my handlebar. So I almost crashed and went down. You had to get through those things as you do in bunch races on the velodrome. Everyone's so tightly packed. But I was able to overcome those obstacles within the race. But we were so confident throughout, and we completely took control. And were with, I think it was 20 laps to go, we were in an unbeatable position on points. So much so that with 10 laps to go, I felt that it's over. We cannot lose now. We will win this race. And I started to really think about everything we'd been through, and of course that got me emotional, and I started to cry. And with 10 laps to go, the job's being done. I'm now crying on the velodrome. And then I thought, well, hang on. I couldn't quite focus. Tears are flowing. I've still got to get through these last 10 laps. I had to compose myself again to get to the finish, and then I could let the emotion out. But yeah, it's extraordinary. I went into that 2 hours before that race thinking, there's no way, we cannot win this. I am not good enough. And we completely blew the race apart and dominated it. So it's amazing what you can do with your mindset and how you can turn things around. And you can do the opposite as well. You can be in a good space and be so negative that it'll bring you undone. In that case, I was able to do it the other way around.
It's an extraordinary story. For people on the ride, if you've got a question, just whack it into the questions down here. We're going to be going to questions very, very shortly. But that's an extraordinary story, mate. And for a lot of us who were there watching it, not knowing about Alexander, not knowing what you'd been through, just looking at, the black and white story of it in the paper and on the net and things like that, sort of saying, your first Olympics in 12 years, you're lining up with one of your best mates, you're one of the best in the world at it, and you've executed to the letter. So that's the story, right? Yeah, and it's not until you sort of peel it back and look at, your journey all the way through. Just switching a little bit back to, the 30 for 30 with Lance Armstrong's on at the moment, and you were on your bike on the tour with Mappe and Grolsteiner and stuff like that at the time that Lance was doing his thing over there. You had a couple of encounters with him. Did you watch the 30 for 30?
I haven't yet, no. So I haven't. I've got Netflix, but I haven't got Foxtel, so I haven't been able to watch ESPN. So I am really eager to see it though, because like everybody, I guess. And the question that gets put to me, well, did you know? Did you know that Lance? And I wasn't.
Did you see him do the blood bags? Did you get on the bus? Yeah, did you?
He left a trail of blood all the way to the start line.
I knew it.
The short answer is that, and let's be clear. I raced. I was in races that Lance was in, or I was in races that Lance was trying to win. But I was never competitive against Lance head to head directly. Put him on a velodrome and I blow him away, but not on the road. There was always, suspicion. I think when Lance first came back after cancer and won his first Tour de France, he was an exceptional rider before cancer. And I saw him. I was in a race in America, a tour that he won against a rider named Tony Rominger, who was a very good Tour de France contender type of rider. And that was an eye-opener. I was like, wow, Lance can beat this guy in a multi-day race, not just a one-day race, but something over 7 days. Gee, he is actually a lot better than perhaps I thought he was going to be. Then he got cancer. But he came back from cancer and won the Tour de France. And that was a big surprise. 1999, Lance Armstrong winning the Tour. His body shape had changed, gotten leaner. His climbing ability was incredible compared to what it was beforehand. But it wasn't night and day. He had improved, but it wasn't as if he'd improved by 30 or 40%. And few of us started to think, wow, there must have been something that while he was doing his cancer treatment that he discovered that made him a better athlete, something he could use from his cancer time treating cancer that he was now using as a drug to make him a better cyclist. And then the second year he won, we thought, well, look, he's had 12 months. Everyone, the other riders that are racing against him may have discovered this medication by now, and they hadn't. And the third year he won, I thought, oh, maybe it's he hasn't discovered some kind of new medication, which he hadn't. He was just using the same medication as the guys he was trying to beat, which certainly doesn't condone it. We just thought because it was Lance, who seemed to not come from nowhere, but really step up, that he had some kind of drug that the guys that were winning the Tour de France, in that dark era, didn't have. But that wasn't the case. Lance himself, which is hard to say because you don't want to condone anything that Lance did or said or does, but he was an exceptional athlete. But he was also a complete arsehole. He cheated everybody. He cheated his teammates. He cheated the fans. And I think he still cheats himself. Maybe he's now starting. That's why I want to see the documentary or the interview 30 for 30, because I want to hear the way he perceives himself now, because he really didn't quite, he didn't do himself any justice when he made the admission on Oprah. He basically just blamed the sport. He blamed the competitors, said it was just creating an equal playing field, et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't that simple. He made those decisions himself. He didn't have to. He could have been part of the solution, but he just chose to be part of the problem.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we're going to open up for questions. I think we're coming up to the 40-minute mark, Sandy. So I think, are we into the last 5 minutes warm down? I just can't see on my screen at the moment.
Yeah, we are. Just over 5 minutes to go, Duncan. Yeah.
Okay. So is there any questions for Scotty? Scotty, of course, has covered so many things, from his unbelievable track career to Olympic Games, Olympic triumph in 2000, his European 10 years in Europe, both on the velodromes and on the roads. Is there anyone got any questions? So I've got Brad Guy here writing in. He goes, "What's next for Scott?" If we can go on mute, that'd be great. If you're not going to ask a question, go on mute.
Next for me? Well, what was immediately next? The Tokyo Olympic Games. And not as a writer though, but as a commentator. So if we go back to 2012, that was the first Olympics that I got to commentate. It was for Channel 9, and interestingly at the time, it's less relevant now, but because I got to commentate at the Rio Olympics as well, was going to do Tokyo this year. But 88 as a writer, 12 years later, Sydney as a writer. 12 years later, it was London Olympics that I did as a commentator. So I was desperate to go to Rio so that I didn't have to wait another 12 years to go to another Olympic Games. So I did Rio, done World Championships, Commonwealth Games. I've sort of put myself into that position now as the cycling commentator for Channel 7. It was 9 in 2012. It's been Channel 7 again since then. But unfortunately, with everything that's happened this year, it wasn't that they've just postponed our contracts for the Olympic Games. They tore them up. So Channel 7 rang around to everybody that was commentating or scheduled to commentate to say, look, we're cancelling all the contracts because, they didn't really go into detail, but, we'll renegotiate again for next year. I feel that I'm confident that I'll get the gig again, but I'm sure it will be at a renegotiated lower fee. And I understand why. I don't want to get paid less, but I understand that the world post-COVID and sport post-COVID-19, I think is going to look very different. There'll be a lot of companies that won't be putting in as much money as they were previously. So it's going to be really challenging, I think, for even in my other roles that I do. I work a lot with Cycling Australia. I'm the race director for several events. The Jacko Herald Sun Tours won several National Road Series events, plus the National Championships. But there's a lot of, we just don't know what those events are going to look like now with probably decreased budgets. Yep. And by the same token, any companies, any businesses that come through this, in a good way, I think have fantastic opportunities, whether it's in sports sponsorships or even now what's happening with Telstra, with this group. This is an opportunity that has come from a terrible situation that's brought the Telstra community together and doing something really good. So this may not have happened, or probably wouldn't have happened if we weren't in lockdown. So there are opportunities that will come out of it, but I am a bit nervous about the negativities that may come as well.
Yeah, the new normal and what it throws up there. I've got a question from, where is it? James Mort. So, James, we're going to unmute you now. If you'd like to ask your question, mate, go for it.
Scott, that was extraordinary. Now I know how it feels to pedal and cry at the same time. Thanks for that. I'm the Vice President of Cairns Cycling Club, and we've just renewed our track. We're just about to build a new clubhouse, and track racing's on the rise in Cairns. Any tips to really get these kids involved?
Look, yeah, thanks, mate. Cairns, I've never raced in Cairns, so yeah, it's something that perhaps
better come up.
Yeah, well, I was almost up for the National Road Series event last year. Didn't quite happen. And there's also a like event that I wouldn't mind doing up your way as well. So perhaps we can hook up and do something. With the kids, I think the modern day coaching, what I'm seeing is they do take a little bit of the passion out of things. They make it more about the process, and it's all about, whether it's Zwift or whether it's heart rate training or power training, and it's all about watts. And they, riders are being told to not go and race because they've got a particular type of training session they need to do that day instead. If you're looking to build the base, especially with kids, it needs to be a good community, a good social program that keeps the passion within that group. So I think while the racing is going to be a part of that, I think it's more about the social side. Get all the kids together. Make them. You don't have to make them, but they'll all become friends. They'll all, embrace the common goals that they have, which is just having fun on bikes. And if you can make it more of a social scene with some cycling attached, I think that's what I'm noticing with the clubs that have been really strong and successful, that it's less about the actual racing and more about the community of the club itself. So if you can build that, you'll have a solid base to keep them around for a lot longer. And that's one of the things we see when there's a real drop-off from the under-17s, in particular with the girls. The under-17 kids come through. It's quite a strong group. And then they go into the under-19s. The boys seem to keep on riding because they all think they're going to be the next Cadel Evans and they're going to go and earn $1 million a year riding the Tour de France. And unfortunately, the girls, none of them are going to make, have been making $1 million a year. And that's something that our sport really needs to try and rectify. But there's a big drop-off. And I think the difference is that the boys are motivated because they want to be professionals in the future, whereas the girls prefer to be a part of something and be a part of a group. So if you can keep it a strong social community within your club, then I think you have a good chance of bolstering the numbers and holding on to them.
Yeah, about making it sticky.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it, mate. Guys, that's the end of our Zwift ride, but we're going to keep Scotty working because he's not riding. And we can keep it going. We've got some great questions coming in. So if you'd like to continue on your cycling or if you need to go, thanks very much for joining us on Telstra Connected Cycling. We've got Natalie Cook next week, and we'll talk more about Natalie when we wind up this call. But I just want to get to a couple of questions, and one of them's here from, where is it? Sorry, guys. From Stuart Lowe. So thanks, Stewie. And your question is, what are the 6-day track events like? What is that? What is it all about? Can you deconstruct a 6-day European track for us?
Yep. So look, somewhat confusing, but I will try and break it down. It's perhaps the most traditional of all the cycling events. The 6-day events date back before the Tour de France, and even the Madison itself. So it is quite interesting. The name the Madison comes from where they very first started racing track cycling, and that was Madison Square Garden in New York. So that's how the name came about, the Madison. In some parts of the world, they call it the American because the discipline started in the United States. And effectively, before PlayStation and Xbox came around, and movies and other bits and Zwift, to get entertainment, they built velodromes for cyclists just to ride around, and people would pay money to go and watch these people on bicycles going around and around in circles, and they weren't even racing back in the day. Eventually that became racing. They started these really long endurance events. Let's see how long a cyclist can ride around a velodrome for. Eventually they could ride so far that they would fall asleep on the bike and fall off, and they thought, that's a bit dangerous. How can we rectify this? Well, let's make it teams. And that's when the Madison itself started, when teams started to form to do these long endurance events on velodromes, and in particular in New York. Then they started to make the multi-day things, and then they capped it at 6. So that's when 6-day racing started. It is based around the Madison, the 2-man team event, but we would start around about 8 o'clock each night, and they've gotten shorter over the years. But when I first started doing these events, we'd finish at maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning after starting at 8. And you're on the track, off the track, doing different races all through the night. So scratch races, points races, elimination races, these journey races, which are each rider gets a little motorbike to race behind. So you get motor paced around the velodrome. And all of those events would give you points. And then your points go to your overall tally. And then typically 2 times per night, you come on and do a big endurance Madison event, which would also give you points, but they were really about distance, taking laps on the field, gaining laps on the other riders. And after 6 days of racing, all of the laps and all the points are put together, and then you get your winners. So it's basically like almost like a pentathlon or decathlon on the velodrome, but over 6 days. So like a road tour. We were doing up to 150 kilometers per night on a velodrome. So really endurance, hardcore stuff. And that's shorter than what they used to do. If you go back into the 1920s and 1930s, doing incredible kilometres, but certainly a lot slower than what we were riding. So there's a lot to it. And it was a big thing in Europe before my time. So in the 80s, definitely, is when I used to get those videos come in from Europe and just focus on the Paris 6-day and London 6-day and dream of doing it. And Danny Clark was the best Australian ever to ride in those events. And I used to watch Danny on these videos and think, wow, maybe one day I could do that. And eventually I got to do it. I won 15 of those events. And that, by doing them, led me to the Olympic Games. All the training I did at the 6 days and experience I gained was came in handy for me when I raced the Madison in Sydney and ended up winning my gold medal.
Fantastic. Now, we've got one last one. It's from Johnny Pitch. And Pitch wants to know, have you ever considered coaching?
I have, and I did coach for a little while. So when I first stopped racing, and the reason, a couple of reasons, I stopped probably earlier than I was expecting to, only a couple of years. I was in my mid-30s, but my partner, we'd lost another child, and we were living in Germany at the time, and it was, again, quite a traumatic experience for us because we weren't expecting it. We'd already had a very healthy girl a couple of years before that, so we'd left our guard down. We thought that everything was going to be fine, and it wasn't. And she didn't want to live in Europe anymore after that. She wanted to be closer to family and friends. So we came back to Australia, and I wanted to continue cycling. So I was training in Australia and going back to Europe for certain blocks of racing. And for me, that became a real chore. It became really challenging to live here and try and still race over there. You know, if you look at the professionals now, no one does that. It's too difficult. So I was leaving later for training. I was coming home earlier. I wanted to get back to my beautiful daughter and play with her. And I was being a Mr. Mum as well for most of that time in the first year back. And it just got too much. So I decided to stop. And I was going to go away from cycling. I was really happy to stop. It felt like a big relief to not have to get on the bike each day, rain, hail or shine. So I was quite happy to walk away from it completely. And after about 6 months, I thought, well, I had a realization. I've been in the sport for so long. Why should I, or why would I waste that experience? You know, I should be trying to help the next generation. So my first couple of jobs within the sport outside of racing were as either a team manager for a team that was called the Drapac Porsche team, which went on to be a World Tour team only a couple of years ago until they stopped. And coaching at the Victorian Institute of Sport. So I did that for a couple of years as well. And it was really doing my media work. So the commentary, I was going to the Tour de France, working for Fox Sports. That stuff started to take over. And it was too difficult to do both. As a coach, you need to be there all the time. I couldn't be taking 2 weeks off or 3 weeks off to go to the Olympics or do media gigs on the weekend, run off to the Tour de France for a month. You needed to be a coach or work in the media. So I chose the media. I really enjoyed doing the commentary work that I've done a lot of over the years.
Well, fantastic, mate. Well, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate your time, Scotty. Some insights and the incredible story of your Olympic gold. It's been a real treat. We've had about 73, 74 people on, and we've still got 60 people on still pedaling post the Zwift ride. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to throw to Kurt now for a bit of a wrap-up. Kurt, of course, is one of our steering committee, and he's just got a bit of information and wants to thank Scotty as well.
Thanks, Duncan, and thanks, Scott. It's certainly fascinating story, and it sort of really makes you think about your own life as well. So really appreciate it, and I think that point about cheers on the bike's an interesting one there for probably a few of us on the call. So thank you also, Di Hannon out there. Thanks for getting the meetup together, putting it together, keeping us all on track today on the Zwift side of things. The other thing I wanted to call out was just there's a few things to Scott's point earlier. Things post-COVID will look different for us. So this is something that we've put in during COVID as something that was, I guess, making the most of a particular situation that was occurring. We're keen to understand what people want after COVID. So at this point in time, we're seeing the interest, we're getting great feedback. You'll see a survey come out to you, and really looking for your feedback around what do you want to see after COVID? What do you want to see in terms of these events? What do you like? What should we continue doing? The other one there that I think is worth a look is for those of us on this call that want to build our professional network, want to maybe have a discussion with some of the people on the call. various different reasons. We've got a LinkedIn group that you'll see pop up very shortly. Feel free to join the group. Gives you an opportunity to keep track of other people that might be on these calls as well, and further your own conversations where that's appropriate for any of what you're trying to do there as well. And the final call out, I guess, and back to Sandy's point from the start is feel free to bring a friend. We're keen to see these events continue to grow. So please feel free to invite other people, bring them along, and get them added to the list ongoing as well. So that's all from me. So back to you, Duncan.
Thanks very much. So on behalf of Sandy, I can see him still pedaling away and smiling, so obviously didn't go too hard this morning. Diane, John Pitch, and the rest of the organising committee, thank you very much for coming along. Thank you to our guest again, Scott McGrory, Olympic champ, provided some amazing insights and entertainment this morning. Thanks, Scotty. Appreciate it, mate. Next week, we'll be speaking to another Olympic champ. This is going to be beach volleyball gold medalist Natalie Cook, so we're getting away from cycling just for 1 week. And Natalie will be riding her deadly treadly at home on the Zwift ride as well. And sharing her incredible story in sport. So thanks again for coming along to Telstra Connected Cycling, where we put connecting people with technology around our passion for cycling. We'll see you next week, guys. Thank you.